So welcome everyone. This is our public input meeting, our second public input meeting for our wayfinding assessment for the city of Williamsburg. And today our consultant Merge Design is here. That's John, Glenn, and Lauren. And they'll be walking you through a presentation that talks about design concepts for the wayfinding, which is the signage that we're looking at installing to help people find their way into the city and around the city. After this session, we will release a survey for people to provide their input, and we're also recording this webinar so people can watch it after the fact. So John, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for attending or tuning into this as it's being recorded. Our presentation really is twofold today. The first part is we're just going to give a very quick summary of some of the wayfinding assessment that we've done. We did a survey and we've had stakeholder meetings. I've been to Williamsburg to sort of get the lay of the land. And then Glenn's going to talk a little bit about 3 design options that we have prepared to get feedback on. As I mentioned, we did do a public survey for the wayfinding to see what some of the top issues were. Directional to attractions, parking identification, attraction identification, and some of the tricky roads that someone referred to, Confusion Corner, which is at Richmond and Jamestown. There are things that we've started to look at. There was a very high interest in digital tools and how that can be included in the program and also work within the context of Williamsburg, in the historic, not necessarily in the historic area, but what are things that we can do to sort of influence that. We do want to make sure that from a design standpoint that we are staying within the scale and the charm of Williamsburg. So we'll talk about that when we get into some of the design options. I think it's important as we go through our assessment to keep in mind that we're going to talk a lot today about the signage component, but when we looked at all the different elements of a wayfinding journey, we considered both the digital elements as well as the environment and even support materials, things like maps and brochures, how that plays a role in someone's ability to get from point A to point B. So in the report that we turn over to the city, it has a lot of that information. Today we're going to talk mostly about signage, where I'm going to jump into some of these other elements as well, sort of more of the high points that we developed as part of the report. We thought about, as we went through this from a digital standpoint, how you might consider including digital elements. So really just thinking about sort of someone's journey along the way and at what point can they get information, whether that's before they even arrive and they sit down at their computer and they start to do some research about Williamsburg, to as they make their way through and maybe there's an information hub or some sort of digital kiosk that provides information, as well as just using their phones to find their way. So we sort of looked at a couple elements within that to consider how digital elements might be included in the program. I think one of the things you have to think about whenever you do that is what kind of content and what kind of layers of digital information are you going to communicate to different visitors? So there are things that we started to outline, and then as you get into the elements and maybe, once we get past sort of the overall schematics of what the signage might look like, then we'll start to layer in what kind of information is it? Is it transportation information, wayfinding? Is it are they social layers? This was just a small diagram that's in the document that talks a little bit about, what kind of information can you have if you had a kiosk that was, a little bit more interactive rather than just something that was static. Could it have a Wi-Fi signal? Could it display information about events? Does it have an iBeacon that maybe pushes information to the user? There's things a lot, and you'll see this when Glenn gets into some of the design. A lot of times when you hear about, digital screens or displays, you think of something that's very flashy, but there's other kinds of technology out there. This is an example of e-paper, which has much more of a sort of a matte feel to it. It's pretty more appropriate to somewhere like Williamsburg, where it's not sort of that, in your face sort of digital component, which would not be appropriate. But Glenn will talk a little bit about this when we get into the design. Also things like, going from digital elements to printed elements, but maps. So, the maps, some of the maps that are out there now are not, the most legible or friendly maps. Sort of from an orientation standpoint, there's printed maps. There's maps out on the street, and there's, this is actually the same sign that has two different maps on it. So part of our scope is to design a new map for Williamsburg. So, we've started to look at just schematically how graphically this may fit into the overall program. One of the things that we're trying to do, and when we get into the design, you'll see it is this map graphically starts to feel a lot like the signage, so that it is one voice that's being communicated. So this just shows how it can be simplified with a color palette that might be appropriate to Williamsburg. And then we'll start to bring that into some of the other design elements, whether they're graphic icons or patterns or the color palette that's used. If you think of wayfinding, always think of it sort of wayfinding as big picture in. So you arrive at the city of Williamsburg, you direct people either to a district or a destination, they park their car and they become a pedestrian. So that's a lot of sort of the process that we go through in order to look at what some of the wayfinding issues may be. So, big picture in, sort of first looking at the gateways coming off 64 and coming from other directions into the city. We will be developing designs for these locations for gateway elements. There'll be, once we get through the initial schematic design, what you'll see today, then we'll start to expand out to some of these gateway locations. But you start to look at these gateway locations of, which ones are the wow gateways, or sort of the primary points in, which are sort of the red stars, and then which ones are more secondary or even tertiary, where, it's not, a large gateway, it's maybe just a simple marker with a panel on it that identifies that you've arrived into the city of Williamsburg. A very common element in a wayfinding program, especially in an urban wayfinding program like this, is to utilize districts. It gives everybody a much farther reach as far as a destination, and directing people from around the city to a destination area. So you may not see, an individual sign for the library, say all the way up at the northern edge of town, but you may see signs for downtown. And as you get closer, then you start to see the attractions. So directing to districts is an important part of how we move people through cities. Then we've also started to come up with identification of where parking and destinations are, so we can start to put that list together. And I think with parking, that became a very big conversation with many of the stakeholders. And one of our sort of approaches to parking is that you can't just sort of solve it only by running out there and putting up signs everywhere. It really has to have a full approach, wayfinding approach to it, so that when someone goes on the city website, they start to see this P icon that's utilized not only on the website, but on printed materials and on signs. So you start to create that language. I think one of the benefits that Williamsburg has is that the Passport app is utilized across not only the city, but then the William and Mary use it. So you can really use it everywhere, which is a helpful sort of tool and information that you want to make sure that people realize that. So whether that's on printed material or kiosks, we want to remind people that, hey, you should download the Passport parking app and utilize that to make your parking a little bit more convenient. I think one of the things, and you'll see this in the design as well, is the garages, or the garage, and making sure that that's identified strongly as you drive up to it. It is set back from the roadway, so it's not the most obvious building as you approach it. The terrace is sort of the same way. There's opportunities even within the garage. We've said this from the very beginning, that we look at some of the elevator banks as gateways to your experience to Williamsburg. So not only is a gateway on the edge of town as you drive by, but I think we view it as you get out of your car and you approach that elevator bank, is there sort of a welcoming message that you can provide to people at that point as well. And we'll see that as we get into the design. We are going to direct, obviously, to the garage and to the terrace by name, and then the lots P2, P3, P4. That's how we will direct to the lots. We looked at maybe doing, a lot of times we do it by street name or by association with maybe a place or a destination that it serves, but that didn't really seem to work out cleanly here because there's multiple parking lots on similar streets, and there is a reference now to those lot numbers, so we felt like we were going to stick with those. And then we just went through and started to put together a generic menu of sign types. So, sometimes people look at the menu and they go, oh, that's a lot of different signs, but a lot of those signs are out there now, right? So you have gateway signs that are probably on the smaller side. There are the Colonial Williamsburg, the red, white, and blue signs, which we'll talk about as far from a vehicular standpoint and how that fits into the program. And there are signs out there that direct to parking. So I think what's missing now is you don't really have pedestrian signage. The kiosks you have those, but they're a little bit outdated. I think those are the things that we really are concentrating on as we get into the design, really getting people to the parking and then helping them from a pedestrian standpoint and giving them orientation. So that's just a quick summary of some of the wayfinding issues. Again, I think from our standpoint, how can you include a digital component into this? Updating the maps, how does it fit into the context of Williamsburg and the signage that's out there? And then also really the concentration of getting people to parking and pedestrian signage as they make their way. Glenn's going to talk a little bit about the three design options.
I think what a lot of the things that John had touched upon in the beginning of this presentation are outlined here, and these are really the design issues that we need to always be aware of. The design needs to be evocative of an era, and it needs to fit into the context of this environment, but it also needs to meet the modern standards of today. So we need to always be thinking about that, but we realize that it's a historic place that, it needs to fit into that environment. But it also needs to fit in with the existing systems that are already out there, which are not going to change. The historic triangle signs, the red, white, and blue signs, the regulatory signs that the city has in place, which are green posts. And then there's also some building IDs out there that are green and black. So we're taking all of that into consideration when we start to do this design. The scale of it needs to be appropriate. We need to make sure that these signs are not too big, too small, making sure that the icons are the appropriate size and that the copy height is good. And we also want to make sure that this can be maintainable. We don't want to come out here and do things that are not reasonable and that are sustainable and that are going to end up being durable.
One of the things, Glenn, I wanted to mention as I see the sign up there is we are aware that the visitor center potentially moves to downtown, and that is very much a sort of a circulation issue as we get into this that will have to be addressed from a wayfinding standpoint, because it's a different wayfinding problem where you send some, where the visitor center is now, they go there first and then they come to downtown. We're aware of that as we go through the process.
We're going to show you three design options, schematic design ideas. That generic menu that had all of those sign types, we're just taking a handful of those to get the sort of the design intent and the design direction. We tried to push them in different directions as much as possible, but understanding that we do have to fit into that historic context. So you'll see as we go through those options what we're presenting.
Yeah, we said you won't see like a stainless steel and glass version.
Exactly. So we realized parking and pedestrian signs are probably the most important part of this wayfinding program from our standpoint. So those are the sign types that we're going to show. The first design option, we started to pull together some imagery, and we really are drawn to some of the existing signs, of course, the architecture, the colors, and then we started to do a lot of research into, printmaking and the trades. So this first option, we're thinking about using details that are a little more whimsical, but also reflect the trades that are in Williamsburg. So looking at the parking signs, directing to parking, but using those wood poles with the blacksmith bracket on the poles, but using the color scheme and the topography that is similar to sort of that printmaking, the print shop. So directing to parking, directing to the parking lots when you arrive at the parking garage or the parking lots, having a clear identification, and then pedestrian signs, pedestrian kiosks, pedestrian directional signs that get not only to your destinations, but also back to those parking lots. So this is just a zoom in view that you can see here, and you can see some of the details of what we were inspired by in Colonial Williamsburg.
I think this one also relies on a very simple sign shape and plays more on the patterns and sort of the fasteners.
The pedestrian system, trying to bring that whimsical ideas into the system as well. And in this case, even though we're using the same bracketing structure and the poles, but maybe on the maps, bringing in some elements like patterns, doing a "you are here" that is a little bit more whimsical. But then also on the pedestrian signs, thinking about pictograms, icons, doing cutouts on the tops of the signs that say that these are pedestrian walking signs. So just some close-ups. So you can have a cutout that's handcrafted on the top of the bracket. And then also, instead of directing to destinations by name, maybe using architectural renderings and pictograms to direct to those destinations. So we always like to throw these into photo renderings just to start to see how they would react in the environment. The reason why we chose these light-colored, almost white posts was because they will stand out in the environment, but they'll still be evocative of the time and of the history of Colonial Williamsburg. But like what John was saying before, the parking garages are set back, or the parking garage is set back. So we want that sign now, if you look at the rendering, it sort of disappears within the landscape. But if you do something that has more of a framing and bracketing, and having maybe that red border around it, it will stand out a little bit more, but still fit into the architecture of its surroundings. So another view of it here. And you get out of your car, you start walking. Those elevator banks are gateways. They can have a welcoming message. Not only can they tell you what level you're on, but they can also identify what's adjacent destinations. What are the adjacent destinations that are next to the garage? We're just starting to come up with some different ideas for that, and you'll see that sprinkled through the presentation as we go through it. And then the parking lot identification signs as well. So we're really trying to create a coordinated system with the architectural details of this, not only with the graphics, but also the architectural details. And, you know, you can start to see that, oh, I know those white post signs, those are wayfinding signs, basically. Option 2, we were taking a different approach, and this one's really about brand. City of Williamsburg's brand logo, but also looking at some of the existing infrastructure and signage, particularly that we have to sort of fit in with. The backs of the regulatory signs, the green signs, some of the street signs, but also looking at, you know, a lot of some of the architectural materials like brick, and thinking about the city logo and the city seal and the way it's round, but also starting to think about round shapes and things that are a little more curved. So taking that idea, you know, creating a sign panel and system that has more curved shapes in it, but also taking that parking P and making it an identifiable logo, basically, for the city of Williamsburg. So still using that outer band of text, but making a parking P on the inside. So it's an extension of the city's brand. And you can start to see how that carries through to the same sign types that we were using before in that first option. We're gonna copy the bracketing and the colors of the posts from the regulatory signs. So we're not adding a new sign type to the system. It's basically almost an extension of what you already have out there. But it's functioning. It will have all of the requirements of today, but also using that curved shape on the top that sort of reflects some of the signs that are in Colonial Williamsburg. So the white outline around it will help the green panels stand out against the trees, which is something that that you do already on some of your signs. So we're picking up on that detail, but it really helps it pop. And that blue P, you can see that, you'll be able to see that from a distance, and you'll know immediately that that's where you're going to get parking information. Same thing with the view into the parking garage. You start to see that highlight of a sign. In the parking garage, you know, like we're saying that this is a welcoming gateway, but, you know, doing it in more of a branded way, bringing in the City of Williamsburg logo, you know, the city seal, but then, you know, just the graphics on the elevator bank can change out. They can be whatever we really want them to be. They can be an artist's mural. They can be, you know, a floral pattern. And that can change from level to level or from, you know, wall to wall, basically. But that City of Williamsburg brand will be consistent. Then on the pedestrian signs, using the same post, the same concept, the same sign form, but bringing in on those pedestrian signs some of those, the sign shape of some of the street signs with the rounded edge and the rounded corner. Information kiosks, large and small, that can, and I'll show you that they can have different types of information on them. So a little bit of a zoom in view, but we're just keeping that brand identity consistent.
It's a slight shift in color too, from the green to the blue.
Exactly, yeah, the background color. So we start to look at things in 3D, start to see how they would, you know, all the forms will start to go together. Especially, you know, these shapes, you know, taking the idea from the street signs, but using that rounded corner or the rounded end on the side there. But, you know, having directional signs, almost like the milepost signs or finger signs that you would see. And then an idea of putting it in the environment and seeing what that would start to look like. But also having information that's a map. This might not be the large kiosk or the large map. It can be an area that is the immediate area, or Merchant Square, or, you know, an area that is adjacent. So when we're thinking about these information kiosks, we're thinking that this is this is a good opportunity not only to have the orientation map, but also, and thinking about, the materials, bringing in the brick. These are double-sided. In this case, this is a static version of it. But then we started to think about, can we incorporate those digital tools into this kiosk? The idea here is, starting to think about the social layers and posting current events and upcoming events, things like that. This is e-paper, which is not as, like John said, it's not as flashy as a backlit sign. It's what you would see on a Kindle, but it is totally digital. It's updatable. You can start to see how that can be, you can post events that you have. It can have a direct feed from your websites. It can show parking information. But we really felt like that this was appropriate for Williamsburg, where, if you wanted to have promote the summer concert series, what's coming up, this week, but just by taking that double-sided kiosk and just making it a little bit thicker, making it double-sided so that it can house some of those components in there. But then on the top, you could also incorporate some solar panels in there. So you don't necessarily have to run conduit or infrastructure to this sign, and it can potentially run off of solar. So we're just starting to think about where we can bring in these digital tools into the system. The third option, again, we're really inspired by a lot of the things that we see, in Williamsburg, but this one has a little bit more of a formal and ornamental look to it and approach. Where the first one was a little bit about the craftsmen and the trades. The second one is more about the city brand. This one is more formal and ornamental. So we're inspired by the signs that have the ornamental bracketing around them, and using that as the design idea for this option. Still bringing in a parking P that's consistent and still directing to the parking garage and the parking lots, but just doing it in more of a formal way. Instead of the sign being cantilevered, the signs are more center aligned here, and have these ornamental brackets. The brackets could change out depending on if you're at a lot or if you're at the garage. The directional signs can have more of just a simple round bracketing around it. So in this case, you can see how it starts to work in the environment, with the green parking P. And then the parking lot identification signs. Carrying that through to the information and pedestrian signs. In this case, we're, instead of having your own structure or pole for the signs, we started to think about, well, can we start to mount to some of the existing infrastructure, like existing light poles that are in the downtown area. Using pictograms, directing to public transit, saying what district you're in, downtown Williamsburg. But then having that information pictogram, in the same area where you had the parking one, but now you're switching it out to get information. So if you look, and you can see from a distance, you're going to see that blue information and you're going to start to get, that that's where I'm going to walk to get information. And just the same photo rendering of what that would look like. So those are the three design options. We can take any questions that you might have. But we really tried to push these into three different design directions. And the next step would be to have to expand out the menu. We'll pick a design direction. Sometimes there are options within options, and sometimes we'll combine things. So you might see something from option 2 that you like, or option 1 you want to incorporate into option 2. We can do that. There will be a digital survey where these designs will be posted online, so you'll have further chance to comment on the designs as well.
So Michelle, I don't know if you want to open it up to questions since we only have well, Ricky's on there, so maybe just 3 or 4 people.
Sure.
I
Yeah,
can go back to stuff or.
I think we do have, I think 3 people other than Ricky.
Right.
And so if y'all want to use the chat feature or the hand raise feature, then Joanna can unmute you.
I know that, I'm unmuting you, Barbara. Hold on one second.
So am I unmuted?
You're good. We can hear you.
So I really like the options that you provided and the fact that you provided different options. When I saw the option number 1, that was my favorite. I think partially because of the whimsy that was included in it. But then when I saw option number 2, it's like, yes, we really want to expand the brand of Williamsburg. So I guess my initial thought is to try and incorporate some of both. Doug Pons, the mayor, and I have talked about ways that we can, bring in something that's unique to Williamsburg, whether it be the tri-cornered hat or the Revolutionary Soldier that you showed, or something that creates that Instagram moment for people, whether they're standing by a parking sign or elsewhere in the city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's a good comment. Yeah, I was just going to say that's a perfect comment. I mean, because we purposefully do these options so that we can, bring in those types of ideas and start to put them together. But creating something that is unique for Williamsburg is one of our goals here. And I think that's something that's really important.
Yeah, we just try and get, at this point, we're trying to get a basis for design. It doesn't have to be all or nothing of an option. It's like, what's a basis for design? Maybe option 2, but bring in the whimsical of option 1. Those are the kind of things that we'll work through when we get the comments from everybody.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
And David, I'm going to unmute you now.
Yeah, thanks all. This is really exciting. It's fun to think about something more united. So a question I have in the survey, because I think you'll find some difference of opinions of the town of what just the identity should be. So I'd be curious of how you tried to parse that out. So as Barbara may know, I work at a William & Mary. We have a lot of younger employees, and a lot of them don't identify with the colonial aspect of Williamsburg, but they do like a lot of the kind of the vibrancy that they've seen happen in the last couple of years. And so I saw that tension perhaps in some of the options too. Some were more of a doubling down on the colonial theme, and some were a little more exploratory. So curious how you take the different inputs in, and how do you balance that that perhaps tension of identities within a single locality?
Yeah, I think there's different, I think we tried to show that even just from a wayfinding standpoint and the wayfinding elements or the tools, there's different opportunities to sort of play with those, have that inclusion where you need to have it. So it's not that it has to go across everything, but the parking signs probably have to be a little bit more functional and utilitarian, where you start to get into the elevator graphics where you have a little bit more freedom, and then maybe even bring in more, even trying to combine the sort of traditional look with the digital on the kiosks. So I think once we get everybody's comments, we have to sort of identify where those opportunities are to incorporate traditional things versus more modern elements and messaging.
I also want to add on to that, but we are looking at this currently at the parking and the pedestrian signs, which are mostly in the areas which have that architectural and historical context. But this is a citywide program. We do have to realize that with the vehicular signs that we have to use the historic triangle design. It might be modified a little bit with the terminology, but that is sort of a given that we have to work with. A lot of times when we do city wayfinding programs, that is the unifying sort of sign that will tie together the different districts and as well. But John's right. I mean, we will look for those opportunities to start to bring in those other, you know, aspects.
We'll have to see what the comments are, really.
Yeah, we have to see what they are, and we'll try and incorporate those in.
There are not any more, or no other hands are raised right now. So if anybody else has any other questions, you can use the chat box or raise your hand. I think that might be it.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for participating. And I'll just remind everyone, we will be posting a recording of this, this informational session and a link to a survey for people to follow up with their responses to the different designs. So we'll be posting that on yeswilliamsburg.com, and we'll be sending it out social media and in the traditional press releases. I thank you so much, John and Glenn and Lauren in the background for presenting. And then thank you, Barbara, David, I think Deborah Keen's on. Anyone else who joined us today, thank you so much. And we look forward to this project moving forward. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.